It is a privilege and an honor for me to introduce the two speakers that we have today. Dr. Terry Metzger has 35 years of experience in education. She is currently a successful superintendent in Denair Unified School District, and we appreciate her scheduling in some time for this webinar to share her experiences with all of you during this extremely busy month, as we know, and closing down the school year. She is passionate about coaching and mentoring new and aspiring leaders. And during the COVID pandemic, her primary focus was on mental health and well-being of staff and students, including the implementation of social emotional learning and clinical resources and support. She has successfully led large-scale implementation of high-quality instruction and support for all students, including English learners and students with disabilities. She loves strategic planning, program development and oversight, and fostering positive community relations in her current work. So Dr. Ann McCarty Perez is a passionate educator with over 25 years of experience working in schools to improve processes and outcomes. She has been a middle school teacher, high school assistant principal, middle school principal, and a variety of roles in the district office. It is my pleasure to introduce Ann as one of our associates out in the field, working full-time for us, supporting many clients. And as of June 1, she's also going to be supporting internally Creative Leadership Solutions as Director of Professional Learning as she continues to support clients in the field. She is well-versed in state and federal programming, data-driven decision-making. In her various roles, she has implemented curriculum reviews and writing activities, program and process reviews, MTSS and responsive instruction, student behavior modification plans, and PBIS. Her experience includes a variety of settings to include urban, suburban, and rural schools. It is my pleasure, my great pleasure, to call these ladies both my friends and my colleagues. And I thank all of you for carving out time during your schedule today to attend this event. Like I said, I encourage you to put comments, questions, success stories, wonders in the chat, and I will share those with Terry and Ann as we spend our time together this afternoon. Ann, Terry?
Okay. All right. Well, welcome everybody. It's good to see you. We're going to go ahead and share screens, but before we jump in, I just want to say from my vantage point that it has been a pleasure for me to work with Terry in her role as superintendent. And you're going to hear today, I think one of the things that made her it's so successful for Denair was the fact of communication and the transparency of her process. And Terry didn't know it, but I made her a YouTube star within Creative Leadership because I asked her if I could share the video. She did such a good job laying it out for everybody that that it just other people needed to see it if they're engaging in the work. So Terry, I don't know if you want to say anything or if we just jump into this.
Well, I think I'm just going to say, you know, when I was looking at the slide deck earlier today and our title is Grading Reform Without Tears, I'm not sure that was actually true. Just saying, but no, this has been good work. It's not been easy work, but it really has been worthwhile. And I think we should just jump into it.
All right, let's do it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully everybody can see it here. All right, I got some thumbs up. And anything with Creative Leadership this is always our contact information if you need it, especially me. This is my cell phone number, my email. Please reach out if you have questions after this. Terry has been so kind to add hers as well. Our goals today really are just to discuss, and we want this to really be more of a conversation, where and how the feedback and grading journey started. Discuss how and why it changed to help you prepare for your journey, and discuss how it moved forward with strategies and advice from others who are doing the work. And that's why This is such a cool opportunity to be able to present with you with someone who is on the ground making this happen outside of the person who comes in and out of the district. So the first question that I had for Terry was, where did it start? As we were planning this, I knew where I came in, but I knew from where they were that it had to have started sooner than that. So, all right, Terry.
Yeah, so we really started these discussions in 2019-20, which seems like eons ago, right? And the discussion was really around equitable grading. And what is that? It's grading that's fair and it's accurate for students, that it really measures their progress, their performance in relation to standards. It was really part of a larger discussion about effective instruction, and it was thoughtful at that time because there wasn't this huge sense of urgency around it. And so we were having these very collegial conversations around equitable grading. And then COVID, of course, and in March of 2020, when everything shut down here in California, we really kind of stepped into a different world. We really didn't grades in that year, in the 1920 year, semester 2 grades were really about pass fail. That was an option that the state gave to districts. We had multiple options to choose from, and so we made some grading decisions that year that nobody was really attached to, shall we say. But then the following year, the 2020-21 year, as most of us remember, that was a distance learning year. And we again had to make some grading decisions during that time. What were we going to do for students? What was that going to look like? So there were a lot of voices. There were a lot of loud voices and confident voices. There were some soft voices, and then there were voices that were just mumbling and rumbling, right? I think we've all had that experience. So some people had concerns, mostly around student motivation. So if we changed the grading scale, if we didn't give student grades, then students wouldn't be motivated to turn in work. We wouldn't get anything out of them. But there were some champions as well. There were people who were saying, "Oh, finally, we're finally talking about this, and we're finally going to have to make some decisions." So just this variety of voices really just echoed during this time. And for context, our pandemic grading decision was to make 50% the floor. So we moved from a 100-point grading scale to a 50-point grading scale. And that really drew mixed reviews across the board. So that's kind of where we were. So, and show my little picture, sorry, that's what it felt like. It just felt like all of this, scribbling and, just almost a ball of yarn, just thrown in, onto the center of a table. Like, where do you even start picking at it to try to untangle it? So that really was where it started.
And then I asked, well, okay, so that's how it started. How did it begin?
Yeah. So the changing point for us, and if you have not read Deep Change Leadership by Doug Reeves, you should. When that book came out, and as an administrative team, we read that book and talked about that book. And there were actually two key points for us with that book. The concept of buy-in, or not, just not needing 100% buy-in to move forward. That was really huge. And then Doug talks in the book about imagining what would it be like, or what would happen if you don't do this, whatever this is. And in our case, if we don't make a change to fair and accurate grading practices, what would it be like? And that argument, I think that envisioning what would it be like if we didn't make a change, is really what got our admin team moving and talking. And so at that point, we had a conversation with Doug. We were able to connect with Anne, and we made a decision to move forward with Creative Leadership Solutions. And at that point, I know Anne's going to talk about it a little bit more soon, but we jumped into fast grading, and it was introduced virtually. And it was basically do or try something, whatever that something is. Everybody on the team is going to try something. And then we started the CLS, the science fair, the action research model to continue something, with the idea of all of the things that we tried during the year would be shared at the end of the year in kind of a science fair kind of setting. And then there were some other factors that were unrelated to grading, but they definitely impacted our ability to move forward. There were things like staffing challenges. We had some staffing changes. There was just mental health of our staff and students, right? 21-22 was the first year back after the distance learning year. And even though we came back spring of 21, coming back for that first full year in person just really impacted the mental health, good, bad, and ugly, for many of our staff and students. And so as a result, there were just lots of fits and starts, and so my visual for this is just thinking about a start-stop button, in a car that, we can just start and stop that engine multiple times depending on what's going on. So I'm going to jump to the next slide, Anne, because this really is where I had to make a decision as a leader. Denair is a relatively small district. We have 1,300 students, 4 schools, and I'm pretty well connected to the staff. I have a pretty good pulse on where people are and how things are going. And because of these fits and starts, at one point, Anne and I were on a Zoom meeting with the rest of the admin team. And I said, Anne, we have to put a comma in it. We just have to pause here for a minute, and we have to figure out where to go from here, because these fits and starts, we're not gaining any momentum. As a matter of fact, we're losing momentum. We're losing people. People are losing the will to stay in this work. And so that was my mid-year, eek, we've got to do something and stop. So Anne, what do you want to add there?
I want to go back one slide. Oops. Because this was, we did do one thing that we did well at the beginning. In our virtual rollout, we started, because of where Terry was with her staff, we did start with what I would call the soft rollout with it. And we introduced them to learning around what is fair, accurate, specific, and timely. And we started to operationalize what does fair, accurate, specific, and timely look for them? What does that mean to them? And we did it by their content areas. And so we started to bring them together in terms of collaborating just around thinking about grading and feedback in terms of what it looked like by their department. One thing that I have experienced in my years and figured out is that secondary people like to speak in their content. And there is a department, or in middle school teaming, and even department where people feel very comfortable, just like K-2 people like to be together in K-2 and acknowledge that sometimes it looks a little bit different. And so that's where we started that. And then we did do the in-person launch of the science fair. And then I didn't hear from Terry for a little bit. And then that's when we had the put a comment in it option. And so the first thing that we want, we're going to put you into breakout groups. I think, how many people do we have, Lisa? Looks like we're going to go in groups of about 5, maybe 7. Okay. And we just want you to have a chat with each other of where are you in the process of revamping your grading practices? Have you started the conversation? You're deep in it. You're not sure where to go with it. You're here with us today, so you're intrigued. Yes, the soft rollout was, the question is, can you repeat the soft rollout? I met with the staff virtually. And then we did some learning around what does fair, accurate, specific, and timely mean from Dr. Reeves' book, Fast Grading. And then I just did some Google Forms with them, to be honest, I should say some Microsoft Forms with them to gather feedback. And in terms of having them define what they thought fair, accurate, specific, and timely meant from their vantage point, what did it mean in their department? And how would they define what fair, accurate, specific, and timely means? So that was our soft rollout in terms of just getting the thinking going before I made it in person with the staff. So it just gave me a couple of exposures to the staff before we went. Okay, so we're going to put you into breakout rooms and just talk with each other of where you are in the journey in terms of revamping grading practices. And I think we'll give you about 7 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that this question really is about, for our next part of our discussion, just really having a good sense for where you are in the process. Are you in fits and starts right now, or are you rolling along, or are you just thinking about it? So that will help you to engage with the next part when we come back from the breakout session.
Terry, there's quite a few of us that are in a room together, so we might not be able to do breakout rooms without this echo. Can we just not go into one and do it live? Thank you.
Yeah. And then Ann and Terry, should one person be prepared to share out?
Yes.
Okay, here we go. All 7 minutes, and we'll see you back here.
It's always funny to watch people leave the main room, right? Where are you going?
And this must be Meredith. This must be Meredith's group that's here.
Yeah,
It is.
Okay.
Okay. Ann and Terry, would you like to join a room, or are you going to stay? Your call.
Yeah, I think for this one I'm going to stay because they're going to report out after. Oh, it looks like Doug may be back.
He was trying to join from his phone. Oh, here he is. And I need to work on updating that picture for him.
Okay, I'm going to go to 6 only has 2 people in it and 7 only has 3 people in it. Are we okay with that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think it just ended up because of a group's, not joining probably. They probably won't need quite as much time.
Right. We have about 5 minutes left. Your call, Ann.
Let's close it in 4 minutes because they have a full minute to get back anyway.
Okay, that's true. I'm going to pause.
All right, so one person said that was a little too short, and we know that one webinar is not long enough to discuss grading, but we would love to hear maybe where some of you are in your process, or maybe just a quick summary of your conversation that you had. Feel free to just jump in or pop it in the chat if you'd like.
I can share from Corona Norco. We are in Southern California, and I shared that we began the work looking at our report cards and the standards back in 2018. Mm-hmm. Teachers came together to align a new report card that would reflect the standards. The pandemic hit, and we took a little bit of a break. We picked that up this year, and we've aligned the tool, right, the report card, K-6, we've brought groups of teachers from a couple of grades to look at the report cards and our online grade book to make sure that it's going to meet the needs and make some adjustments. We also have been working with Dr. Reeves, and he came in and spoke about fair and accurate grading to our principals. He spoke to our teacher groups, and where we're at now is we're finalizing the report card itself that will launch in 24-25, and we're going to spend this year working with our teachers, teaching them about fair and accurate grading, working with the community, and Dr. Reeves is going to partner with us. He's going to do a kickoff live for all of our teachers in July and August to set that tone for fair and accurate grading, and then also work with some of our unions, our board members, and communities along the way this next year.
Yeah, fantastic.
All right. Anyone else? Let's do one more share.
Hey, I'm Marissa Etheridge. I'm a SELPA director from Central California. And in our breakout group, a couple of us were talking about how we kind of help general ed teachers understand how to grade students with IEPs. And, you know, you don't give them a complete break. They don't just get an A because they turn it in. How do we teach teachers how to grade students with an IEP? So this is one of the things that we've been working through in our area.
I actually love that that's what you said, because that was one of the biggest questions that came from Terry's group. And one of the things that Terry said that she had that group of champions. And in her champions was one of her special ed teachers. So that's going to help us just kind of move forward. So thank you for that. It's like we planted you, but we didn't. Because the next question that Terry and I talked about in preparing for this was, how did it morph? So it started as a science fair. Terry put a comment in it, and then we came back. And so Terry's going to walk you through kind of how it morphed a little bit.
Yeah. And, you know, it's interesting because we put a comma in it with Anne, but that didn't mean we put a comma in it on the back end of things. You know, things were still happening here. But a lot of it was just kind of happening simultaneously, separate discussions between this group and that group, or at this site and that site. And so things were still happening, but it all felt very scattered during that time. Yet we knew that we needed to pull everybody back together and continue this conversation. So what we did was we reconvened our grading committee that we had started in that 1920 school year. We reconvened that group. And as Anne mentioned, it included a variety of teachers, including a special ed teacher, I think 2 special ed teachers, but one that was particularly vocal, particularly a champion for how fair, accurate, specific and timely feedback benefits all students, and particularly students in special education. So when we reconvened that group, we talked a lot about what are the stumbling blocks and where are the points of resistance that we could examine and determine, were those things that we could provide counterpoints to, or were they just things that we needed to kind of let work through the process? And as part of that discussion, the grading committee, which had not up until that point really reviewed the grading policy, I think mostly because Dr. Reeves really says, don't start there. Don't start at the policy level. Start with the small changes. Start with the things that you, start with your practices that you can change, and then policy can follow. But at that point, when we were talking about stumbling blocks and resistance, the committee asked to review the grading policy. So we brought forward board policy and administrative regulation to the next meeting. And as people were reading it, there were audible gasps in the room as people realized that our grading policy actually was already aligned to what we wanted to do. There literally was one sentence in the policy that teachers felt did not line up. Everything else lined up to where we wanted to be. And I really think that empowered that group for those people who were in the group and maybe were on the fence, it empowered them to get off of the fence and join the champion side of grading reform, fast grading, fast feedback. And it really set the stage for us to move forward. So that spring, we called Ann back and we said, okay, it's time to take the comma out, and we're going to find our friends. We want to offer a 2-day summer workshop that would be voluntary. We focused on grades 6 through 12. Our middle and high school staff, our teachers, is where we focused our energy. Voluntary, it would be paid. So we used some educator effectiveness dollars in order to pay teachers to attend that. And it was required for our administrative team to attend that. And there were really 2 reasons that we did it in the summer. One was we wanted to give teachers time and space to think and to process and really sit with the work. And that's very hard to do if you've had to plan sub-plans and get yourself out of the classroom for the day and then come back and kind of clean up after having a sub for the day. And so that time and space to think was really important. But the second reason that we wanted to do it summer and voluntary was that we really wanted to tap into people who could potentially become champions and lead the work. So that's one thing. When you work with a consultant, it's great. The work that the consultant does with you and your team while they're on site is great. But if you can't further the work, if you can't continue the conversation when the consultant isn't present, you won't actually make any progress. So we were really looking for, well, let's see who signs up, and we'll go from there. And as a result of that voluntary offering, 50% of staff from the 2 comprehensive schools, our comprehensive middle school and comprehensive high school, 50% of the staff joined in the summer, and a handful of teachers from our small independent study charter joined us. And so we actually had a very nice group of folks from all departments. All departments were represented and all grade levels were represented and all schools were represented. And so it really ended up being a nice, a well-balanced group. Now, they were not all champions at the onset. And as a matter of fact, I laid out a challenge to Ann about a specific teacher who was definitely in the opponent's camp of any grading reform, and that turned out beautifully for us because she's now one of our strongest champions. And so just really tapping into her concerns and her fears around making these changes. And now here we have this wonderful voice and champion. So Ann, I don't know if you want to say any more about that in particular, but then I think you're also going to talk about what did we do during that time.
I am. And I'm going to say that, and I always, you all are going to laugh, but whenever I approach some type of committee work or anything like that, I always think of Winnie the Pooh characters. And I try to have all of those characters represented because we need all of those characters. And you have to have an Eeyore, and everybody thinks Eeyore is bad, but Eeyore is not bad. Eeyore is just the realist. And if you read any of the books, you will remember that he was like, I don't know, guys, I don't think so. But in the end, he gave his tail so that Christopher Robin's kite could fly. So he was always about keeping it real, but always did what was in the best interest of the kids. So if it helps you at all to think of Winnie the Pooh characters, because my one question for you, Terry, is when and I'm assuming this is a question that people have on here, when you established your grading committee, how did you decide who was going to be a part of the grading committee? Because I would recommend everybody have a grading committee. How and what type of representation would you recommend for everybody to have there?
Yeah, that is a great question. And we did think very carefully about that. And we wanted to make sure that the grading committee was not full of people who were already on board, right? If you think about just change theory, that, you know, out of 100% of your people, 20% they'll jump on the bandwagon right away, and they'll be your cheerleaders, and they'll move along. And you have about 20% of your folks who are the naysayers, and you may never move them. It's really that 60% in the middle that you want to focus your time and energy on. And excuse me, we did pick a few champions. We picked a couple of people that we thought would probably have some opposition, but that ultimately we hoped we could move. And then the other people that were on the committee really were from that 60%, people that we thought would be curious and willing to explore possibilities, but that really didn't have their mind made up yet, because we felt that they would contribute a lot to the conversation, not necessarily hold us back, but ask the right questions and be willing to dig in on the hard conversations.
Okay. All right. So thank you, Terry, for that. So let's talk about where I started with the group. And I want to say that I heard Dr. Reeves say this, and this has it stuck with me. This grading is a subset of feedback. And when we get really good at feedback, grading comes along. Grading is something that people wear right here on their sleeve, if y'all can't see where I am. And it's really close to the heart, and I think people actually kind of get mad about it, to be honest. And so with Terry's group, I really focused on the feedback end of things, because I wanted them to understand that when we talk about grading and learning, it's really about what feedback we're giving to students. So the process that we used was we reviewed their already identified power standards. So Terry has already done work with her group on power standards. And so that did make the work a bit easier. And that's, if you're like, well, where do we start? That's a great place to start. Really narrow down what you want people to focus on. And then the next piece was defining proficiency. And when we started to lay out that 4, 3, 2, 1 for them, 3 is proficiency. And because they were working in those power standards, then we're like, okay, what does that standard mean? What are the targets? What are the criteria? And Terry, masterfully called them predetermined criteria instead of success criteria. So that way it was in the understanding that we're letting students know what those criteria are. Worked with the group to create the targets and the success criteria. And one big thing that we were definitely working on was getting behavior out of the grade. I don't think that that's a surprise to anybody, because it does still happen. And teachers get pretty crafty at hiding behavior in the grade. And so we have to be very cognizant and separating those two. Another part of our workshop is I had them sharing formative assessment strategies with each other, because within the room were lots of really good formative assessment strategies that they were already using, because that got to learning and misconceptions, which got us to feedback. So everything that we were doing in our 2 days was really about how do we give feedback? What are the misconceptions? How are we helping students to know the target and move towards the target? And then the other thing that I really tried to focus on, their comfort and their ability to lead the work. So like Terry said, she had this group of people to come in that were going to be leaders. And so I checked with them at the lunch break, and then at the end of the day, could you talk to your colleagues about this? Where is your comfort with it? Where is your discomfort with it? And just tried to bring it back to them that it was, yes, they were learning and they were working, but I also wanted to make sure that they were comfortable with being able to lead the work as well. Because like Terry said, after I left, it needed to continue. And Terry, there's a question in there. keep going.
Mm-hmm. So Terry Young in the chat is asking about surrounding districts. Did surrounding districts make the shift in grading, and public or private? Were they more inclined to change, and how were assessments affected by this change? So the first two questions really, I think, go together. I think that districts in our area, surrounding districts, are all working on grading reform, and many of them are not as far along as we are. There are more pockets of grading reform within. We have a bigger district next door to us. We're a fairly small rural district, and the bigger district next door to us has pockets of grading reform going on, but nothing really systemic yet. And then excuse me, as far as private and public schools, it does not appear yet that private schools are making a change, at least not to any grading scale changes. And we didn't either. And that was a strategic move on our part, that we didn't change the A to F grades that get reported on the transcripts. We just changed, this goes to the assessment question, how were assessments affected by this change? Assessments are a predetermined success criteria. So we switched to a lot of rubric grading, but for those teachers who still gave assessments, and a lot of teachers still give assessments because they are appropriate at some times, there was a predetermined criteria for how a student could be successful on that assessment that would then lead to a certain score, 4, 3, 2, 1, which equated to a letter grade. So we still give letter grades, but there's no more 100-point scale that's attached to it. That really ended up being our big change. It really is a 4-point rubric and a 0 if the student doesn't turn it in. We still count missing assignments, but not on a 100-point scale.
Mm-hmm. All right, before we go into breakouts in the next one here, I want to, and you'll remember that Terry went back with her group to look at the grading policy. So our next question is, what is your current policy on grading? And does it have language that will allow you to move forward? And do you know what your current stumbling blocks are? So you can attack one or all of these questions in your groups. We're going to give you 10 minutes for this one, and this is really just kind of tackling current policy and what are potential stumbling blocks for you. All right, Lisa, let's go ahead and go.
We recognize it probably wasn't enough time, but if you'd like to share anything from your conversation, please do pop it into the chat so that everyone can see that. We hope that you guys had an opportunity really to share with one another, just in thinking about where you are in your journey and what your next steps might be, just really hoping that you were able to process the information that we previously shared. So feel free to drop that in the chat. And while you're doing that, I think we'll start. Thanks, Anne. We'll kind of jump back into, when we came back and we reconnected with Anne, what did we do and how did we move that forward? So by now it's fall of 2022, this past fall, just a few months ago. And we made a decision that we were going to move forward. We had this great 2-day summer institute, and the participants from summer were really ready with Anne to lead the work. They had enthusiasm, they had work products, and they really had this attitude of being a lead learner, of learning with others, but leading others in the work as well. And I think Anne referred earlier in the webinar about leadership moves and communication and how key it was. And this is where that infamous video happened in the fall of 2022. I call it the rip the Band-Aid off video, where I basically communicated with teachers, with staff, through discussion with the administrative team, that we needed to move forward, and we just really needed to say that this is what we were going to do, and we were committed to it. And so this year we've had a variety of workshops that have been virtual and in person. And if you just jump back to the last slide, just that this is the last point on there, that, and I mentioned it before, but this idea that you have to continue the work even when your consultant is not there. Sometimes we had Anne in the room virtually. Sometimes Anne wasn't in the room, but we were committed to continuing the work this year. And I think this is probably a good spot before I talk about what contributed to our success. So here's one example of the success that we've seen this year. So in fall of 2021, before we instituted FAST grading and feedback, 36% of our high school students had 1 or more F. In fall of 22, 12% of our high school students had 1 or more F. In middle school, in fall of 2021, 14% of students had 1 or more F. And this past fall, at the end of semester 1, 3% of middle school students had 1 or more F. And I think that we can contribute that directly to the work that we've been doing at giving students fast, accurate, specific, and timely feedback. That has been a defining moment for us as a district.
And I just, like, for context for everybody, that number of, like, if you look at Terry's numbers of kids,
yeah,
that's about an entire graduating class.
Mm-hmm.
So almost an entire graduating class last year would have had 1 or more Fs, and this year did not, which is huge.
Yeah,
okay,
really
Terry, last one here.
Yep. So my little graphic here, my thread is, I always say it's our job as leaders to pull the thread through the work, to really show what the work is, to connect one piece of work to another, to another, to another. And I try to do that with a red thread if I can, so people really can see it. And so what were the biggest contributors to our success? I think one of the biggest ones was teachers who changed their mind through the work, that they maybe weren't so sure, or they maybe disagreed with the work at the beginning of the work. And now that they've seen the impact of the work, they really are on board and championing for us to continue the work. Communication was huge, really the admin team being focused, and all of us, including myself, really communicating clearly to teachers about where we were headed and how we were making connections within our different initiatives. And then our tech department, Anne and I talked about this quite a bit, the fact that our tech department was really willing to work with us on the logistics of the grade book was huge, because some of our teachers that were really resistant weren't resistant because they didn't want to change. They didn't know how they could make it work within the confines of the grade book, the student information system. And that they were, fearing that there was going to be lots of hand calculation that would need to happen. And the fact that we were able to work with tech in order to make it work within the grade book was a really, really big factor. So, Anne, anything else on successes that you are thinking about?
There's just so many. And I just wonder, that tech piece is so important, because her tech person said, what do we need the grade book to do? And if you can get your tech person to say that, then your instruction is driving your grades as opposed to the grade book driving what's happening. And he and I worked together a little bit, but he was amazing. And then he made, and some of you might be wondering, what did the tech person do? He made videos, he helped, he went in handheld days that I was there. He made sure that he was available if they had questions. And it just, that support full circle for like, okay, we want to do that. And then her magical tech person, I call him the unicorn, made it happen.
Yeah.
So that was and he really is a unicorn. So
yeah, and he had teachers test out different different grading scales and things on the back end to make it work. And teachers said, "Oh, yep, that looks good, that looks accurate," or "Nope, that bombed." And then he took that feedback and made additional adjustments. So he really was great. When I think about our ongoing or our future challenges, I'm really thinking for 23-24, I'm thinking about onboarding new teachers and making sure that our new teachers understand where we've been and where we're going. I think that's really important. When I talk to students about the new grading system, they're very clear on what's working and what's not working. And one of the most common comments that I get from my students who are leaders on campus is a sense of frustration around it's that for some teachers, it's very, very difficult to get a 4 because the expectation is perfection. And so now going back and re-looking at success criteria for a 4, that a 4 doesn't mean perfect, that it means exemplary, that it means above, that it's somewhere above meeting standard. And so what is that? And so it's digging into that a bit more deeply. And then the last thing that I think we're really going to be focusing on next year really centers around feedback. How do we give good feedback? Students call out by name teachers that give helpful and meaningful feedback and teachers who don't. Students are very aware and very in tune to the type of feedback that they're getting from teachers. And I want teachers to hear that so that they can improve the feedback that they give to students. So that's what we'll be focusing on next year.
all right, so we've reached the end, and I want to say thank you, Terry A, for really leading your district in the work and being so clear with your communication, and for everybody for joining us today. I did put it in the chat that Terry and I will stay on if you do have questions, but we want to be respectful that we've hit the time that this is over. So thank you for joining us today. And again, we'll hang out for a few minutes to answer questions that anybody may have.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. The materials will be sent to you within 48 hours of us receiving the recording of the webinar. We appreciate you allocating some of your time for us today.
All right, I can't imagine there won't be at least one question. Come on.
Okay, so what do the rubrics look like? So I'm an art and design specialist. And so like I'm probably too thorough, and I've moved away from grading each assignment like prior to my district saying, hey, we're going to go this way, just because I read a lot of Ted Dintersmith and Tony Wagner and Ken Robinson. And so I moved to doing just a portfolio, and it's their final. So they check in, at the midterm, at the quarter, and whatever. Then I use Google Classroom. So I have the comments on the side, and I'm like, okay, you're missing this, add this, take a better picture so we can actually see it. Things like this, add your title. But I'm just curious because my rubrics are really specific. Is your title there? Is this there? And I helped write the state standards in my state for my area, but I still feel like, ooh, what should it look like?
So what we really pushed with Terry's group, because this was a piece of grading. I mean, there's lots of different rubrics that you can use, but I really we worked on the 4-3-2-1 rubric. If you've read any of the analytic type of rubric, so that within their tasks, or for you would be a portfolio, if there's checkpoints in the portfolio, that they have clearly outlined what proficiency will look like, and then the 4 being exemplary. And in that, when we think about success criteria, the clearer we are, the better product we get. So you kind of made my heart leap when you're like, I'm really specific.
Oh,
Great.
so that's good. Do I leave that and then I just evaluate with that number scale and then just have that like down below? Okay.
Right. So
so I'm almost there.
Right. So when you think about what's going to make a student successful on that portfolio,
Mhm.
you line it all out there. Like, these are the things that are going to make you successful. And that stems from what's the learning standard. The learning standard is that you should be able to do this, 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 and this. So what's going to make you be successful? So when I work with groups, I just tell them, just think of the success criteria as a much more granular version of that learning target in the student language that they can understand and that they can shoot for. Because ideally, what we want students to be able to do, especially for any type of creative subject, I call you the creatives, that I'm here and it looks like this, but it needs to look like this. And here's how I'm going to make it look like this, if it's graphic design or, you know, whatever it is. And that's, I think what's fun about your subject is, how do we add objectivity to a subjective subject? Right. I was a music teacher, so it's all subjective. But there are definitely clear things that you can put in rubrics that are going to have students demonstrate their proficiency, that are very specific on being successful on your task. So
Well, I'm
yes.
more concerned about the process over the product. I would never say to a classroom full of kids, and I can say this because all my kids have left now because I have school right now. So I don't care about their piece. I just care that they did it from start to finish, and that they followed the process, and that they worked collaboratively, if that was part of the process, whether if that was a critique or literally building something with someone. So that's more of my concern, because that's actually a bigger.
Yeah, I worked with art teachers who are like, I can't tell a kid that their art is bad. I was like, okay, well then what are you teaching them? Well, I'm teaching them how to do line. I'm teaching them how to use different artists to influence their work. So that's what was going into their criteria.
Okay. And I will just like to add that, because you mentioned something earlier about, like, you know, is their name on their work, right? That for some of our teachers, it really helped that they developed a checklist, right? That it's not part of the rubric. It's just, here are all the things you need to check before you turn this in. It's a checklist. It's not a rubric.
Okay. So,
and, you know,
call it a checklist. Okay.
Yeah. You know, you need to have your name on it. You need to, you know, have, you know, what are all those just technical things that they need to have? We'll get them out of the rubric, put them on a checklist, and let the rubric focus on the learning.
Okay.
And yes, it should be specific.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great
I
question.
have a quick question about rubrics, continuing this conversation. Do you have any good resources for teachers to make their own rubrics, like digital rubric? Go to this site and it'll help you with your rubric. And
we use a really simple that I created. I created it, and her teachers used it in Google Docs, and it's just 4, 3, 2, 1 down the side, and where they put their criteria. If you will email me, I will send you that blank thing. I will say, this is in Google, there is an extension called Gubrick, where teachers can create those, and then and I think it actually, at least it used to, you could even record voice in like a cell to give feedback to kids in Gubrick. It was really, I think some of your teachers might have used that, Terry. I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. They
but
love
if you-
their Google extensions.
Yeah.
Can
if
you include that in the materials that you send out to everybody?
Yeah.
Instead of
emailing me, sure.
Because I might want that too.
thank you so much. I mean, it's really helpful. I think some of our teachers are just grappling with like making the standards in kid-friendly language, and then how to make those success criteria based on that 4, 3, 2, 1, and 0 for not turning in work. And what those cells should look like. So I find with our teachers that if we give them a sample, typically around reading or language arts, around a particular standard, they can go, now I know how to fill in. Sorry, I'm in Hawaii. We call them pukas, right? The cells, how to fill in the cells. So thank you for any of that.
Pukas from now.
I like that name.
That's awesome.
I wondered, where in Hawaii?
Sorry, I'm on the main island in Honolulu. So we have about 296 schools, but we are one LEA SEA.
Right.
So we do one, we do all, right?
Right. Yeah, no, that's great. But don't discount the learning that happens as they're creating their own pukas, because that is part of it. So a sample is great, but teachers, they're just looking often for well, I'm looking for a rubric that somebody else has already created. And it really
takes away the power of the process.
Yeah, it really
I know
does.
that.
And their own understanding. I mean, determining what the success criteria is a huge aha for teachers. When we ask them, well, what does a 3 look like? What does meet standard look like? And they have to describe what it looks like. And now we're working on exemplars, right? Like, let's look at some examples of a 3 or a 4 or a 2. And when they have to do that, it forces them
becomes
to dig
real.
Yeah.
It becomes real and they
Yeah.
dig in.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, ladies. I
Yeah.
really appreciate this sharing. It's been
You're
great.
welcome. Thanks for joining us. All right. I think Nancy.
Alrighty, I'm gonna bring this to a close, so Terry can get on. If you've seen Terry's office above her door, it says the children are waiting.
Yeah, I'm facing the right direction, but my camera is not.
Right, so the children in Danae are waiting for Terry to go back to leading her district. So thank you, Anne. Thank you, Terry, for joining us this afternoon and sharing your journey. We look forward to the journey continuing next year and Terry out supporting others in California that are starting and or continuing this journey. Same with Anne. So thanks everyone. Within 48 hours, we'll follow up with an email with the PowerPoint, the recording, and then the rubric resource that Anne shared. So we'll be in touch.
Great. Bye,
Have
friends.
a great rest of the school year. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.